Okay. I'm here. Can everyone see me well? Because I can't look at the screen otherwise. Yeah? This is good? Okay. Yay. I'm so glad that this is working. And everyone can hear and see me well on the Zoom? Yes. Perfect.
Yes. So the top half of your head is cut off.
My head.
That's better.
Oh, that's better. Okay.
Better.
Is that? Okay. Is that better? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to speak to everyone here, and you guys get to see and hear and be part of it as well. And I want to point out that this handout that I gave all of you, not all of it. So a big chunk of it, the my notes part, it was in the PDF that I sent out this morning. And then this overview, like the look into the Chumash, is in here. But what I'm going to do for the sake of those on Zoom is I'm going to do all the reading. I hope that's okay, because I have a mic, and if we go around, right, then whoever's on Zoom can't hear when you read.
Can you just make sure they can hear you well?
Yes, everyone on Zoom could hear me well? I'm not looking at you. Yes? Okay. All right, fantastic. So, okay, so we are at Parashat Vayera, which is actually my birthday Torah portion. Yeah, because my birthday is this Shabbat, the 17th of Cheshvan, which always falls out in Parashat Vayera. Yeah, this is my birthday Torah portion. And we'll just do a little bit of an overview of the whole Parsha, just kind of like a summary of it all. And then what we're going to do is in the fourth Aliyah of this week's Torah portion, there are 4 stories in this one Aliyah that each have a really fascinating theme message and relate to women in a certain way. So I thought that that's where I wanted to highlight it. So I'm going to read an overview of Parashat Vayera, which if you have the whole handout, I'm actually not doing the front page one. If you go to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th, the 7th page, but it says page 1 on it. Basically, it was 2 different handouts that I combined together. The page number on the bottom actually says 1, but it's the 7th page of your packet. So it's after, basically, I took the 4th Aliyah and the verses from that and put it here so that we could read it inside. And then, okay. I think that there's a lot of questionable things in this week's Torah portion that raise a lot of questions. So, okay. So first of all, on page over there, I'm doing the overview of Parashat Vayera. So God reveals himself to Abraham 3 days after the first Jew's circumcision at the age of 99. And Avram rushes off to prepare a meal for 3 guests who appear in the desert heat. One of the 3, who are angels disguised as men, right? These 3 men are actually angels, announce that in exactly 1 year, his wife, Sarah, who is barren, will give birth to a son. And when Sarah hears this, she laughs like, yeah, right. There's no way that I'm going to be able to have a child. And Abraham pleads with God to spare the wicked city of Sodom. Again, this is just like an overview. 2 of the 3 disguised angels arrive in the doomed city where Abraham's nephew, Lot, extends his hospitality to them and protects them from the evil intentions of a sodomite mob. The 2 guests reveal that they have come to overturn the place and to save Lot and his family. Lot's wife turns into a pillar of salt when she disobeys the command not to look back at the burning city as they flee. While taking shelter in a cave, Lot's 2 daughters, believing that they and their father are the only ones left alive in the world, get their father drunk, lie with him, and become pregnant. The 2 sons born from this incident father the nations of Moab and Ammon. I'm right. Do you not have it, Adrian? Is it? Okay, you know what? Maybe before that, unless there's a mistake on here. Okay, right before that. There we go. Avram moves to Gerar, where the Plishtim king Avimelech takes Sarah, who is presented as Avram's sister, to his palace. And in a dream, God warns Avimelech that he will die unless he returns to the woman to her husband. And Avram explains that he feared he would be killed over the beautiful Sarah. So God remembers his promise to Sarah, and he gives her and Abraham a son, who is named Isaac, which in Hebrew is Yitzchak. Yitzchak means laugh, will laugh, right? Sarah laughed when she heard she was going to have a son. And Isaac is circumcised at the age of 8 days, and Avram is 100 years old, and Sarah is 90 at their child's birth. Hagar and Yishmael are banished from Avram's home and wander in the desert. God hears the cry of the dying lad and saves his life by showing his mother a well. Avimelech makes a treaty with Abraham at Beersheba, where Abraham gives him 7 sheep as a sign of their truce. God tests Abraham's devotion by commanding him to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And Isaac is bound and placed on the altar. Abraham raises the knife to slaughter his son. A voice from heaven calls to stop him. A ram who's caught in the undergrowth by its horns is offered in Isaac's place. And Abraham receives the news of the birth of a daughter, Rebekah, to his nephew, Bethuel. Okay, so if you read that as an overview, probably have lots of shocking, like what is happening in this big Torah portion, and these stories that really, at first glance, seem very crazy. I don't know what's the right word. Bizarre, very bizarre. That we're going to go into further. And of course, I know I'm going to repeat this every class because I really think that it cannot be stated enough that Torah is from the word hora'ah, which means lesson. And there's a lesson in every single thing in Torah. It's not a history book. It's not telling us bizarre stories. It's not telling us an order of events. It's really here. Every single piece of it is to give us a lesson. And so we are meant to live with the times. That is what the Chabad Rebbe spoke about. We need to live with the times. It does not mean live with the latest fashions and the latest celebrities and the latest news, but it actually means live with the time of the week. What is happening in this Torah portion that relates to my life that I can take a very practical lesson from and implement it into my week? So I wanted to highlight the 4th Aliyah in this week's Torah portion because there's 4 different stories. And we're going to compare and contrast these stories to each other and really dig deeper to find a relevant lesson. So actually on page 3 of your handout, right, it just kind of, we're actually gonna do the stories inside I have the actual verses there for you because I think it'll just be interesting to read it inside. But the 4 stories in the 4th Aliyah are the destruction of Sodom, Lot and his daughters in the cave, Sarah being abducted by the king Avimelech, the king of Gerar, and the birth of Isaac. Okay, so these are the four stories that we're gonna kind of dig into. So if you turn back now to page, let's see, on the handout, 1, 2. It's on the back of page 2, and it says at the bottom 119. And if you printed out the PDF from the email, you're not gonna have it in front of you, but what you could do is find it on Chabad.org. You can find the entire Chumash. It's called the Kahat Chumash Online. K-E-H-O-T. And if you want, you could even just Google it, Kahat Chumash Online, and then you'll find Parashat Vayera, and then you can go to the 4th reading, which is chapter 19, verse 21. So does everyone see here where I'm at? Yeah? No. Beginning of your like booklet, and it says 119 on the bottom, which is like. Okay, so what I'm going to do, it's hard for me not to ask everyone else to read. I don't want you to get sick of my voice. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just read through the 4th Aliyah, okay, which has these 4 stories in it. Now, what I want to explain to you when I'm reading is that whatever is in bold, the wording that's in bold is actually a direct translation of the verse. And whatever is not in bold is like using the commentary to help us, right, understand the Torah portion. So it's here, it's kind of like interpolated. It's put in so that it reads much more like a story than if you just read the bold. Okay, so this is like helps us read it as if it's like a story straight through. Okay, so the angel replied to him. We're talking. This is going to be about the destruction of Sodom, right? The angel replied to him, "In this matter too, I have showed you favor. Not only will I rescue you, I will not overturn the town of which you spoke. But hurry, escape there, for I can do nothing until you arrive there." Because the angel had ascribed the ability to overturn the city to himself, which could be construed as a display of arrogance, he was forced at this point to admit that he could not act without God's consent. The town of Bela was therefore called Soar, small from then on. The sun had already risen over the earth when Lot reached Soar. This is about Lot, okay? Here too, God deferentially consulted with his heavenly court and made sulfur and fire rain down on Sodom and Gomorrah from God out of the sky. It initially descended as actual rain to afford them a final chance to repent, kind of similar. It reminds me of Noah and the flood. Like it started as a drizzle. Like, are you sure you don't believe that there's a flood coming? Right. So here also it was like started as a rain. When they refused to repent, it became a downpour of sulfur and fire. In the early morning, God overturned those 4 cities and the entire plain, together with all the inhabitants of the cities and the vegetation of the ground. They were all situated on one section of the earth's crust. So God simply lifted up that sheet of rock and flipped it over. Had he waited until later on in the day, when the moon is no longer shining, the moon worshippers among them would have been able to claim that they would have been spared had the moon been out. Had he destroyed them by night, the sun worshippers among them would have been able to claim that they would have been spared had the sun been out. God therefore destroyed them in the early morning when both the sun and the moon are shining. The inhabitants of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah acted wickedly toward both their fellow human beings and toward God, whereas the inhabitants of the cities of Admah and Sfoim acted only wickedly toward God and not toward their fellow human beings. Since antisocial conduct subverts the whole purpose of creation, Sodom and Gomorrah were burned to ashes in addition to being overturned, while Admah and Sfoim were only overturned. So just Sodom and Gomorrah were a place filled with people that were very, 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 very evil. They were known for not just their lack of hospitality. It was like if someone would come and try to stay there, they would do different forms of human torture and ways of they were really horrible to people. Okay, so now what's happening is God says, I'm going to destroy this city, but Avram asked that his nephew Lot be saved. Lot and his wife and his family. These angels in the form of men are coming to Lot's house and they're saying, listen, you've got to leave. You have to leave this, run away from the city, and you can't look back. Lot's wife turned around, looked behind him at the destruction, and she became a pillar of salt in retribution for having denied salt to her guests. So that the reason it's like this concept of midah k'neged midah, like measure for measure. Her husband Lot invited these guests into the house, and like we said before, Sodom and Gomorrah, they were more than inhospitable. They were horrible to guests. So her guests, I guess they asked for some salt for their food, and she thought, well, this is a perfect opportunity for me to say, oh, I don't have any salt. I'll go get from the neighbors. And she would go to the neighbors and say, I need some salt and then she said, because I have these, why do you need salt? Because I have these guests in the house. And this is kind of like the way that she sort of let everyone know, I have these guests in our house. And then a mob came to come and try to kill these guests. So it was like this measure for measure that she was turned into a pillar of salt. Okay, Avram woke up early in the morning, for he had instituted the practice of daily morning prayer, and went to the place where he had stood before God. He gazed upon Sodom and Gomorrah and over the whole area of the plain, and he saw smoke rising from the earth like the smoke of a lime kiln. What's that? Like a kiln where you...
Yeah, they probably do
Kiln.
it in the
Okay.
process.
I know what a kiln is. Okay. And so it was that when God destroyed the cities of the plain, God was mindful of how Lot had protected Abraham in Egypt by going along with his pretense that Sarah was his sister. And in recompense, he sent forth Lot from the midst of the upheaval when he overturned the towns in which Lot had been living, even though he deserved by all rights to perish together with them. Okay. So that's the destruction of Sodom. Then we come to the next story, Lot and his daughters. Okay. Even though God had granted, and I'm on page 121 now, right? Because I'll tell you why it's kind of like not a sequential order up seemingly, because I only did the English of the Chumash, right? I took out all the English pages, so I didn't put in the Hebrew side of it, so the pages are not in order, seems like. Okay. Even though God had granted his request to spare Tzoar, Lot went up from Tzoar and settled on the nearby deserted mountain together with his 2 daughters, since he was afraid to remain in Tzoar because of its proximity to Sodom. And he and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. By divine providence, there were casks of wine in this cave. Lot's 2 daughters thought that the whole world had been destroyed except for them and their father, similar to what had happened in the flood. The older daughter said to the younger, our father is old and will soon be unable to father children or will die, and there's no man in the world to marry us in the usual manner. Come, let us give our father wine to drink and sleep with him, and thus produce offspring from our father. That night, they gave their father wine to drink. The older girl went and slept with her father, but he was so drunk that he was not aware that it was she when she lay down next to him. But afterwards, when she arose, he was sober enough to realize that it was she, but he pretended not to know. The next day, the older daughter said to the younger, last night it was I who slept with my father. Tonight, too, let us give him wine to drink, and you go and sleep with him, and we will produce offspring through our father. That night, they again gave their father wine to drink. Even though Lot was aware of what had transpired with his daughter the previous night, he did not refuse to drink from the wine again the next night because of his inner allurement to illicit relations. This time, the younger daughter got up and slept with him, but again, he was so drunk that he was not aware that she had lain down or arisen. Thus, Lot's two daughters conceived from their father. Although they were both guilty of committing incest, the older daughter was the instigator. The younger one had simply followed her lead. The older daughter gave birth to a son and named him Moab, which means like Moab, from father. Av means father, and he is the ancestor of the people of Moab until the present day. The younger daughter also gave birth to a son and named him Ben Ami, son of my kindred. He is the ancestor of the people of Ammon until the present day. The older daughter was not embarrassed by her behavior and therefore gave her son a name that explicitly publicized her act. In contrast, the younger daughter was embarrassed and thus tried to obscure her sin in a less blatant name for her son. Right, Moab from my father, Ben Ami is like from my people. Somehow we're related. Okay.
Somehow one is different than the other. Like from my father.
One is just a little bit more explicit, directly saying where he came from. Okay, are we missing 121, 122? Okay, hold on one second. I think because it goes.
Go to 120.
She also said, yeah, okay, sorry. Now, because this is confusing, right? The English to the Hebrew, right? So now we're going to go to 122, and then it's going to go to the other side of 122. Yeah, I guess that's what it is. Okay, let's do this. Okay, so now we've got story number 2, all in the fourth Aliyah. 4 stories, fourth Aliyah. So we have the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the story of Lot and his daughters. I'm sure all the questions are arising. Okay, then we have Avram. And the story with his wife Sarah getting captured. So after the cities of the plain were destroyed, travelers no longer had reason to pass through Hebron. In addition, Lot fell into disrepute once his daughter's pregnancies became evident because it was obvious he had committed incest with them. For both these reasons, Avram journeyed from there in that same year to the Negev to the south and then settled between Kadesh and Shur. Coming to finally sojourn in the Philistine city of Gerar. So you could see that in the map there. As he had been in Egypt, Avram was again asked about Sarah because her youthful beauty had been restored to her and she was not yet pregnant. Avram said of Sarah, his wife, without asking her permission, "She is my sister." Avram did not ask Sarah's permission to say she was his sister this time, for he was sure she would refuse in light of her unpleasant experiences in Egypt. So this is like a repeat story. I actually want to explain that in last week's Parashat Lech Lecha, to this week's Parashat Vayera, there's a lot of like the same story happening. Okay, and you could read it again on your own if you want in the overview at the way beginning. But I'll just kind of tell you that it's both Parashat Vayera and Parashat Lech Lecha are very dedicated to Abraham's life, both of them. Right, so we meet Abraham at the end of Parashat Noach, Parashat Noach, the second Parsha. That's where he is, born, and then he's chronicled a little bit more in Chayei Sarah. But that's just kind of like preparation. Lech Lecha and Vayera. This week we hear a lot about Abraham, but there's a lot of overlap. Okay, not overlap. There's a lot of like similarity. We see like this story here and this story here. God appeared to Abraham in Parashat Lech Lecha. God appeared to Abraham in Parashat Vayera. Sarah, his wife, was abducted in Egypt by the king there in Lech Lecha. Sarah, his wife, was abducted by the king in Gerar in Vayera, right? So there's many things that happen in both. Him banishing Hagar, him fathering a son. In Lech Lecha, he has Yishmael. In Vayera, he has Yitzchak. So there's a lot of like, it happened here, it happened here. And you could read more about that. Maybe if we have time, I'll explain a little bit of it, or maybe I'll just leave you with this, that Lech Lecha was Abraham's life before circumcision, right? So before circumcision, while his life in Vayera was post-circumcision. So before circumcision, it was like Lech Lecha, go to your true self, go to you. It was about Abraham. It was about his own personal journey, his own self-development a little bit, right? His own progress, his own ascending the ladder of spirituality, however far a human can take himself, like human effort. Parashat Vayera is God appeared to him. Now he has this circumcision. He has this mark on himself of something above human intellect, above just rationale and understanding. And that is Vayera. Then God appeared to him. And then we have Avram at a whole new level, his spiritual development way beyond what he can do himself. So that's a little bit of just the difference there. So where was I? Okay. So Sarah, after what happened to her in Egypt, over here, she did not want to have the same thing where Avram says, she is my sister, right? So Avimelech, the king of Gerar, sent messengers, and he had Sarah brought to him. But when he tried, and Avimelech tried to molest Sarah, an angel prevented him from touching her. And furthermore, at Sarah's request, God blocked all the secretionary channels of the bodies of the king and his entire household. There was basically a plague where like everything, all their organs and all their openings, everything was like blocked. It was sort of like an illness, a plague that befell them. And God came to Avimelech in a nocturnal dream saying, you are going to die from this affliction on account of the woman you took, for she's a married woman, and you will be guilty of adultery if you have relations with her. Since Avimelech had not come near her, right, and he didn't actually ever touch her, because every time he tried, he was like afflicted with this plague. He said, oh God, would you put to death even an innocent nation? Am I to conclude that you also causelessly wiped out the generation of the flood and punished the generation of the dispersion as well? Did her husband not say to me, she is my sister? And she herself also said, and now I'm kind of backtracking a tiny bit, he is my brother, the other side. And everyone else I asked, her servants, her camel drivers, her donkey drivers, also replied that they were brother and sister. I did so, meaning he's saying, I took her for myself with an innocent heart. I didn't think I was taking someone who was married. I had no intent to sin, and I'm with blameless hands, for I have not yet touched her. So God said to him in the dream, I too know that you did this with an innocent heart, but you cannot claim that your hands are blameless. For I myself spared you from sinning against me by sending an angel to keep you away from her. It is precisely because I knew that you did not intend to do anything wrong that I did not allow you to touch her. Okay, now I'm going back there. So now this is again God talking to Avimelech saying, now return the man's wife. Do not fear that he will not want to accept her back or that he will hold your actions against you and not pray for you, for he is a prophet, and he therefore knows that you did not defile her and that you are innocent. He will therefore pray for you and you will live. But if you do not return her, be assured that you will die, you and all that are yours. So Avimelech got up early in the morning. He called for all his servants and discreetly told them all these things, and the men were terrified. Avimelech summoned Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? What wrong have I done you that you should bring such great guilt upon my kingdom and me? You have brought upon me things that do not normally happen. Such an affliction is unheard of. And Avimelech then asked Abraham, what did you see that made you do this thing? And Avimelech replied, look, when a traveler arrives in a city, people usually ask him what he would like to eat or drink and not whether his female companion is his wife or his sister. I therefore said to myself, there is simply no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me on account of my wife if I disclose her true identity. In any case, she really can be considered my sister. She is the granddaughter of my father, and a person's grandchildren are considered his own children. But she is not the granddaughter of my mother. So since we are related through my father and not through my mother, it was permissible for us to marry, and she became my wife. When God made me wander from my father's house, and I knew we would pass through lands inhabited by wicked people, I said to her, there is a favor that you can do for me. Wherever we go, say about me, he is my brother. Having lost the argument, Avimelech realized that he needed to make amends for his behavior. He took flocks and cattle, servants and handmaids, and gave them to Avram to placate him so that he would pray for him and return Sarah his wife to him. Avimelech said, my land is here before you. You may settle wherever you please. Do not be afraid of my subjects, for they are moral people and will not molest your wife. To Sarah he said, as a token of my esteem for you, I have now given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Let this gift and gesture of respect serve you figuratively as a cover over the eyes of all those with you who would look askance at you because of this incident, preventing them from doing so. The fact that I had to go to such expense to mollify you shows that I did not abuse and discard you, but rather that I was forced by divine intervention to give you up. And for anyone who may in the future cast aspersions on your behavior in this episode, it will serve as proof of your innocence. Avram prayed to God, and God healed Avimelech and the members of his household of their secretionary blockages, including his wife and bondwomen, so that they relieved themselves. For God had blocked every orifice of the members of Avimelech's household because of Sarah, the wife of Avram, and at her behest. Okay, that was story number 3. So we've got the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the story with Lot and his daughters, the story with Sarah getting abducted by Avimelech, and story number 4 is the birth of Isaac, all in the 4th Aliyah, the 4th section of this week's Torah portion.
Why does it say that they would kill him?
Avraham. They would kill Avraham because as depraved as they were, they didn't want to commit adultery. So, oh, if you're married, we want her. So if we kill you, then she's not, then her husband's not in the picture anymore. It's like, it's like, we'll have a little bit of, I don't know what, conscience, like we're trying to do a little something good in the middle of doing something terrible. Like, okay.
So murder
Well,
was
murder
better
is,
than adultery.
I guess murder is better than adultery over there. Okay. Or yeah, if you murder and then you cover up the murder, right? Like if no one knows that that ever happened, then it just looks like you married someone versus adultery. No, I guess it was like he's common, so to speak. Hello, Sandy. I guess it was like perhaps common for anyone who was beautiful for them to just like the crossing guards or whatever, right? The border patrol to just be like, we're taking you to the king. The king wants beautiful, woman or something. Yeah. Yes. The birth. Okay. So now we're up to story number 4, the birth of Isaac. So Sandy, just to catch you up very briefly, there in this week's Parashat Vayera, in section number 4, there are 4 stories in section number 4. So we're going to kind of compare and contrast these 4 stories. So we went through the story of Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed. We went through the story of Lot and his daughters and Lot, they were saved from Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed, but they were in a cave and his daughters thought mistakenly that the whole world was destroyed, just like it was destroyed in the flood. And so they got their father drunk and slept with him in order to have children because they thought, how else are we going to keep the world? That's story number 2. Story number 3 is that Avimelech goes to Gerar and his wife Sarah, he says to the people of Gerar, he says, she is my sister, because they wanted to take her and give her to Avimelech, and if he said she's my wife, then they would kill him in order to take her. So now they're just gonna take her not knowing, and they were all Avimelech and everyone in his kingdom or his household, they were hit with like a plague every time they tried to approach her, so they actually couldn't do anything to Sarah. They end up returning Sarah and apologizing and giving a lot of wealth to Abraham. That's story number 3. And now we're at story number 4, which is the birth of Isaac. Yeah, Vivi, do you want to cut pieces and pass it around? I would love for everyone to take. Okay, so then we have the birth of Isaac. So I'm reading right now where I am actually in your packet. You'll see like there's a page that says 124 at the bottom. That's where I'm reading the birth of Isaac. So but before God healed Avimelech and the members of his household, God had already remembered Sarah, as he had said to Avram that he would. She became pregnant. This is indeed the rule. When someone needs something and prays for that same thing for someone else, God provides for his needs first. And God did for Sarah as he had spoken to Avram. She bore a son. So, okay. Thus, Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age. Okay. At the appointed time of which God had spoken, the 15th of Nisan, and this is the year 2048 from creation. There were scoffers who did not believe that the child was Abraham and Sarah's. Some accused Abraham and Sarah of adopting a child and claiming it was their own. Others assumed Avimelech to be the father, pointing out that although Abraham and Sarah had been married for years, Sarah only conceived and gave birth after having been abducted by Avimelech. To silence these ugly claims, God gave 3 proofs that the baby was indeed theirs. First, he was born on the exact date God had promised. So God said, right, you're going to have a son on the 15th of Nisan. Wouldn't it be nice if you knew like exactly the date, exactly the gender, exactly. Second, God provided Sarah with an abundance of milk, proving she had given birth, as will be recounted presently. And third, the baby looked exactly like Abraham. So Abram named the son who had been born to him, whom Sarah had borne him, Isaac. And God circumcised his son Isaac on the 8th day after his birth, as God had commanded him. And that is the end of the 4th Torah portion. So that, even though there are more stories, and of course there's the binding of Isaac, which is in this week's Torah portion, those are the 4 stories in this 4th Aliyah that I want to kind of dig through a little bit. But before we do, does anyone have anything themselves that they want to bring up or question or ask?
Me, I've always found it interesting that the line of Moshiach comes from Moab, and Moab starts from such nefarious beginnings.
Yes.
That's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. 100%. Yeah, we're going to definitely talk about that.
And they were not destroyed.
They were not destroyed. They were not destroyed. Okay, so this I think is really fascinating. If you look at page 4 of your handout, and for those of you that printed the PDF, you should have it there. By the way, you're all allowed to ask questions as well. If you want to unmute yourself and say anything, you're welcome to. Comparing and analyzing the 4 stories. I want to go through this chart because I think this chart, it says, on page 4 of your handout is really fascinating. And it gives us definitely some powerful things to think about. So if you look at, right, we have the description of the story. So if you look at the destruction of Sodom, how would we describe that story? It was sad, harsh, and severe, and there was no perceived good ever came of it years later. It's not like, well, this happened and then therefore here's all the good that came from that, right? It just looks like a very sad, harsh, severe story. Then we have Lot and his daughters, which is also a very unfortunate, very shameful story. And like Tessa just brought up, that ultimately good came from it. Ruth was a descendant of Moab, and Mashiach is a descendant from Ruth. That's fascinating, right? So very difficult story, but some good later came from it. Then we have Sarah's abduction by Avimelech, which is also, again, a degrading and negative story, but it was a huge Kiddush Hashem. It was a huge sanctification of God's name because everyone realized here what was going on, like the whole, right, Avimelech, his whole household, all the people, they realized, like, number one, there's a God in the world. Number two, right, like the Avram is a man of God, that Sarah is someone special, right? Like it was a huge sanctification of God's name. And that was like immediate, right? You see Avimelech, he sends Avram off. He says, he's apologizing. He gives him tons of like riches and wealth. And it was like, you are correct here, right? So it was a big, what we call a Kiddush Hashem. Hello, Yaya, welcome. Here is a 4. Never done a Torah yet 4. Make yourself comfortable. Okay. And then we have the last of the 4 stories is the birth of Isaac, which is just right there. It's just joyful and happy and miraculous right from the outset. And it has remained that way till today, right? It was just this amazing thing from Sarah finally giving birth to a son. So I'm going to super briefly catch you up, Yaya, that we are Parashat Vayera is the 4th Torah portion of Vayera. Yeah, the 4th Torah portion in the Torah, and there are 4th Torah portion, 4 stories in the 4th Aliyah. Look at that. Okay, there are,
That's not 4 o'clock.
and it's not. And class is not at 4 o'clock. So we're diving into the 4 stories in the 4th Torah portion. And the first story is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The second story is where Lot and his daughters thinking that they're the only ones left in the world, get their father drunk and sleep with him so that they can have children. The third story is Sarah, Avram's wife, is abducted by the king and he wants her, but then he ends up returning her and realizing that, because Avram says she's my sister. And then once he realizes she's married and we're going to give her back and all that. And then the 4th story is the birth of Isaac. Now, if you want to actually read those stories more in depth, you have that at the whole beginning of your handout. Okay, because we went through them in depth. But now we're on the chart that is on, it has a page 4 at the bottom of your handout. So, and there's a chart there that says comparing and analyzing the 4 stories, right? So now if we compare and if we look at these 4 stories, we see that story number 1, just terrible and no good to come of it. Story number 2, terrible and good coming from it later, right? Eventually Ruth, who Mashiach is going to come from. Story number 3, again, very terrible story, but right immediately afterwards, a great sanctification of God's name. Story number 4, the birth of Isaac, happy and joyous and good from then till today, right? So this is the powerful lesson, I think. That this is also God's way of interacting with the world, okay? So you can see it in the chart there. When what God does for us seems sad, it seems terrible, it seems harsh, it seems severe, and we may never understand the good in it, right? That is like the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. It seems harsh and it seems terrible, and we might not ever know why did this happen this way and why did it have to happen and what good can come from this. That's one way that God interacts with the world. Another way is when what God does seems sad at the time, seems difficult at the time, but ultimately you see the good in it. And again, I'm sure each of you can take this idea and relate it to your life, where I'm sure there's something in your life or happened in your life, something either in the past or current that was really difficult that you still are like, I don't know why, right? And then there might be something where you're like, this was really sad or this was really difficult, and this amazing thing came from it. And then way number 3, when God does something to us that seems sad when it happens, but we see the good in it immediately, right? So it's like right away, you see something really positive that came from it. Okay. And then the 4th way that God interacts with the world is when what God does for us is revealed goodness and kindness. Anyone have any examples that come to mind for them in any of these 4 ways?
I just have a comment on the destruction of Sodom.
Yeah.
Let's see, no perceived good. I see some good. I see the execution of justice. This is a land where their charter, their laws said that you can be punished or killed for being kind to people. This is what I read in midrashes. And that Lot's, another daughter of Lot's, was murdered by the inhabitants of Sodom for feeding a beggar. She was feeding him on the sly, and then they found out and they tied her down to the ground and smeared her with honey, and the bees stung her to death. So this is a terrible, terrible place to live, where goodness and kindness are punished with torture and death. So, it's justice. It's harsh, it's sad, it's severe, but it is justice, I guess.
That is a fascinating way to look at it, because it's kind of like, without using the word justice, it's like there were these terrible people in this terrible place and they were destroyed because they were terrible. End of story, right? So that is a fascinating look at it. Like, well, the good of it is that that's how it should go. Like, there was justice, right?
And they were killing people for being kind.
Yeah.
So, in the name of Lot's daughter, who was murdered by them, they got their just desserts.
Yeah, I just wonder if that's really, it's an interesting topic, right? Like, would you say that because justice is served, it's good that comes of it, right? Like, let's say all the Nazis were persecuted, what's the word? Brought to trial. Does that make then the good that comes from the Holocaust? I'm not so sure that, right? Like, it's interesting. Yeah.
No, it's the killing of the Nazis that's good. It doesn't justify what the Nazis did.
Right.
It's ending the terrible behavior.
Yes. Right. So here, right. So just here, the reason is that there's no good that came from it, right? Versus like there's good that came from the other 3 stories. Here, we're glad that there was justice served, right? It wasn't like, I see what you're saying, right? Like, the good is that at least justice was served. It wasn't just like this place that was terrible and treated people horribly and they get to live.
You know what? Yeah. Looking at it from what you're saying, yes, that's good, because it's interesting because, right, nothing really good came of it, but the good was that it ended the evil.
Exactly. Right. So here the distinction when I say nothing good and then good much later, and it is like the coming from it. Right. Hard to realize that you're here. What resulted from it. Yeah. So here is the really, really, really powerful lesson for each of us. It's a hard one, but it's super powerful. Emunah is faith in God. Okay. And faith belongs in each and every single one of these circumstances, scenarios, in each of God's ways of interacting with the world. In other words, it's not like my faith is, because I have revealed good and revealed kindness and revealed amazingness. So now I can really trust that God is good and God does good and God, right? Like, which is why even it says there, right? No perceived good. Like, there is no good that we see, but that doesn't mean that God is good. And somehow, in some way that I will not ever understand, right? Like, what God does is good, whether we get it, whether we don't get it. So emunah, believing that what God does is for the best and believing in God himself, goes in each of these 4 scenarios of God interacting with the world. Okay. Any thoughts, questions?
Well, I've been studying, we've been studying with Rabbi Rice on Thursday.
Yeah.
It's 5 o'clock, so it's a very.
No,
nice-
not 4 o'clock.
Yeah,
Still not 4.
5. But it's
Oh,
a
so
very
today you're
nice
gonna learn at 5.
but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
nice
yeah.
'cause it's Parashat HaShavua.
Oh,
So it's very
so you're
nice
doing-
to
okay.
go from here to Rabbi Rice. It really works.
It's not too
out
much
well.
Parsha? You don't want a different topic?
No, because then Friday night is more meaningful when we
Ah,
discuss this at the table.
love it.
So
That's
it's
amazing.
really good. So, but what I learned from Rabbi Rice, and kind of what you're saying here, yeah, we are where we are supposed to be each moment of the day and in our lives.
Yes.
So if something felt terrible, or you get news that's devastating, or you go through things that you don't think you can get through,
Yeah.
it's where we are supposed to be at that time. And for me, as we go through life, which is not always easy,
Mhm.
I see that God says, okay, this is where you need to be right now.
Mhm.
This is what you have to get through. This is what you have to learn from. This is what you have to do.
Mhm. Yeah. And you know, as you were speaking, something that came to mind for me is that we are really, what I think is happening is these 4 stages, like these 4 different ways of God interacting with the world, we all have all of them, right? So there's different ones, and we're kind of like weaving in and out of all of them. But it's possible that we're weaving in and out of all of them, but we're only seeing one, right? It could be that we're like, I just see badness, and I hope that down the line I'll see good or something, right? Versus opening ourselves up to realizing, well, what is the good that is revealed in front of me right now? Or what is, this was sad, but immediately I can see the effect, the positive of it. You know, this is actually I wonder if this would be an example, right? Like my father, when he had his terrible car accident, right? So it was like bad and immediate good. I'm saying terrible car accident, brand new car totaled, and my father's alive, right? So it's like my father's alive. That's all that matters. It's like he lived, amazing, right? So there's like, but hopefully no one would do that in that scenario. But let's just like someone could just get stuck on the fact that they like lost a brand new car, right? And like, okay, you're like, yes, I'm glad the person's alive, but they could just get so like, maybe I don't know, down that like we just bought this brand new car and now it's completely totaled or whatever, right? Like, in other words, I think it's not just that, yes, this is God's manner of interacting with the world. I think it's also, it's our responsibility, I don't know if that's the right word to use, to see how God is interacting with us in all of these ways and not stay stuck in just one of them.
Seems like
Yeah.
it's what you focus on,
Yeah.
awareness.
Yeah. Because like, right, because you can have like a revealed good that comes down the line later, but you're just not even paying attention to it. You're not even acknowledging, right? Because you're just like, nope, this was just terrible, but what about this other thing, right? So that does have to do a lot with awareness. Anyone have any specific examples that come to mind for them in their life?
For me, it was the decline of my dad. So I got caught up in the decline, pain-free with drugs,
Mm-hmm.
and then giving him the morphine till his last breath was I got stuck in that. But then now I look at the good of, I have his legacy and he really didn't suffer. I mean, it was a decline, a natural kind of a decline.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad I didn't get stuck. I mean, I'm mourning still. It's only
Yeah.
been 2 months, but I'm also living and, doing my history project, and same with my mother-in-law who just died a few months ago. There's a book now written about her that's on the New York Times bestseller.
I want to read it.
Really?
It's called The Dressmakers of Auschwitz.
Is there a video already on it? No.
Well, there's
Film?
online. If you Google it, you'll see.
Who,
some
did you
YouTube
just tell me about it?
Auschwitz.
That's a
It's
different
on
one. Yeah.
Netflix.
Oh.
I have to watch that
Different
I
one.
think there's something else. Okay.
She's a nurse.
That is actually a beautiful example. Death and then what comes after, right? Because death is going to be hard and sad and grieving and that, but then also being able to like carry on someone's legacy and also being able to think about everything that they've created in this world and left in this world, right? So there's like, again, that balance. And I think that might, I wonder if that would be like, that would be like the third level, right? Sarah's abduction by Avimelech, where it's like sad, but you also see like have, something else to hold on to afterwards. Yes, that's true. Yes. Yes.
So, not to be Pollyanna-ish, but you also were able to help him.
Yeah.
And that's something that always comforted me after my dad died, was I was able to help him stay at home in his last years. It was real important to him.
Yeah.
Like amazingly, Vivian, right? You were like, Vivian's like the epitome of a incredible caretaker slash daughter. So it's not, that's being recorded. Have it on video. Okay, so that's these 4 stories that that with this, this way, the description of the stories, you see this progression of them, and then God's manner of acting in the world. And I really think the lesson, yes.
What I really like about Judaism is that Judaism allows for questioning God and being angry at God and having a relationship with God, not just blind faith.
Yeah,
That's part of the faith, is all the questioning and all the
100%.
Yeah.
You know, actually, anytime that I talk to my mentor and I say something like, you know, I'm so angry, she's like, God can handle it. Like, throw it on his shoulders. Like, be angry at him. Like, she's always encouraging me to like be angry at God. She's like, he can handle it. He's the one who deserves the, you know.
What's your question?
Question, did I miss something? How is Sarah's abduction a good thing? Okay, so Naomi, if you have the PDF in the handout that I sent you, okay, so first of all, we went through the story in depth, which is in the psukim of the Torah, which was not in the handout, but we went through how basically it made a really big Kiddush Hashem. It was a huge sanctification of God's name, because they all realized that Avram was a tzaddik and Sarah was a tzaddikis, that they were both very righteous, that there was a God in the world. I mean, they were like stricken by a plague every single time you would try to approach Sarah. Like, it was a huge Kiddush Hashem. And they let Sarah go. Nothing happened to Sarah. They let her go, gave her back to Avram with like a lot of like, you are right, and here is wealth and riches because we were wrong, and take this and all of that. So there was like immediate good that resulted from this incident. Okay, and now here is something else that I think is fascinating. Okay, so if you turn to the next page of your handout, so this is page 5, we have another chart where there are actually women involved in each of these 4 stories, right? So, and I would even say the main character is, to a certain extent, of each of these stories, right? So the destruction of Sodom, it's described in very, very general terms, right? So it's hard for us to imagine the extent of the destruction and what exactly happened in this destruction, because we read it in the verse, it's very general. But it does talk about a woman, Lot's wife, that helps us to better understand the devastation, right? Because the Torah was saying she looked back to see like what was going on, and she turned into a pillar of salt. And that was directly because she was part of that evil. You know, she was saved because she was Lot's wife, and she maybe wasn't maybe as evil, or so to speak. But we see, so here Lot's wife stood out in her degree of evil, but her merit, so to speak, in this is like helping us comprehend the destruction. She looked back, she saw that everything was being destroyed, she turned into a pillar of salt. Okay, then we have Lot and his daughters. Okay, and the daughters are definitely the main character of that story, and they acted in an extremely questionable way. Their actions were absolutely wrong. They justified themselves in their mind. In their mind, it made sense to them why they were doing this. So they had self-justification. Then we have Sarah, who is the central character in that story, right? Avimelech taking Sarah. And Sarah is the epitome of righteousness, and she 100% maintained her dignity and her modesty. And Avimelech realized, I'm dealing here with a very, very righteous woman. And then again, in the birth of Isaac, you could say Isaac was the main character, but who is the main character always in a birth? It's the mother who does all the work, right? So Sarah is the central character. It was her that God remembered. It says God remembered Sarah. It was to her that he gave a child. She was barren. It was like a big deal about Sarah having a child specifically. And of course, she did all the hard work, the pregnancy and the birth. And Sarah exemplifies faith and belief, right? Back to that idea of having faith. She waited patiently for 90 years before being blessed with a child, and she never gave up hope. Although she was skeptical, right? She laughed. She was like, I don't know if this is really gonna happen. So I'm not sure about the never giving up hope. Maybe it's like she couldn't imagine, it's like she couldn't imagine it happening, but obviously if God said it, it's going to happen, Like she laughed at like the notion of it, but like, okay, right? Like I believe, I trust in God. So I think that this is also just like fascinating to see that there are, you know, a woman character in each of these. And even though it's, you know, it could seem like they're hidden or they're not so much in the picture, they really had a tremendous influence here. Each of these women, right, in these scenarios really had played a key role and had a tremendous influence. And it's the same thing, obviously, that we can, obviously, as our power and Jewish women, right, there's acting wrongly, acting questionably, justifying ourselves, or acting righteously, acting with that epitome of righteousness, dignity, modesty, belief, hope, all of that. And we kind of, again, see that thread over here. And then, last but not least, what Tessa brought up is like that the birth of the two ancestors of Mashiach are mentioned in these stories, because Ruth came from Moab, and Ruth was the great grandmother of King David. She was a Moabite, and Mashiach is a descendant of King David. So he also, therefore, Mashiach comes from Moab. And Yitzchak was one of the forefathers of the Jewish nation, Mashiach among them. So obviously, right, Mashiach is also Jewish descendant, right? And these are our forefathers. So Mashiach is a descendant of both Moab and Yitzchak.
I have another comment about the
Yes.
number 4.
Yeah.
Which when there were the 4 matriarchs.
Yeah.
So
Another 4 in here.
another 4.
Sarah was one of 4.
It's really terrific
Yeah.
when you think about that. The
Yeah.
other thing is that Yitzhak couldn't have been born before. They had to wait until Abraham was circumcised.
Mhm.
It wouldn't have made sense for the next father of the Jewish people to come from prior to the circumcision,
Mm.
because he wouldn't have been any different than Ishmael.
Uh-huh.
So it was all a matter of timing.
But that's what you're saying. In retrospect, it now makes sense, but not like then.
Well, probably not for Sarah, but,
Right.
but absolutely for me, for now.
Right.
it makes
Right.
sense.
In retrospect, it's like,
Yeah.
why would you have?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah.
Is there a way to decode 90 years in the Bible and 90 years in?
Yeah. It's all very recorded.
No.
Adina, I have a
Right. Sorry, hold on 1 second. Oh, sorry. 1 second, Robin. I just wanted to.
I meant
Yeah.
understanding 90 years. I can understand 90 years, but not a woman having a baby at the age of 90.
Oh, like that you're
So-
saying. Yeah. Well, right. The same way that like Adam lived 950 years,
Yeah,
right?
so
Like
is
the,
there a way of breaking down what they call 90 years in the Bible in terms of understanding? Does 90 equal 45? Or
so,
something?
yeah. So I think that it equals 90. It just equals like, just something that we can, right? Like the lifespan of people changed dramatically after the flood, from after the flood to before and before the flood, right? So the flood changed something in like the DNA, so to speak, of the world, of the way God did things, right? In more ways than one. So I think it's still that amount of years. It's just that 90 meant something different than our version of 90.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
maybe
Like
permission.
time-wise, it's the same.
People could live to be hundreds of years old.
They did in the past, not now. Now the lifespan has changed. Right. I think it's like, right, it was like hundreds and hundreds of years old. Then it went to like, 175, Moses was 120, right? And then it got lower. And now we're actually going back slightly higher because of modern medicine. Yeah, Robin.
Just a quick comment before my regular comment. As far as Noah, it just struck me that, a big thing that happened along with people not living as long is that we were given permission to eat animals. That I don't know what the connection is. I didn't just throwing it out. But why I really raised my hand is regarding Lot's wife's destruction.
Yeah.
This poor woman whose name we don't even know.
Yeah.
Strikes me as unjust. What she did at the most was she looked back. Maybe she didn't believe that Hashem was really gonna destroy Sodom. I don't know why she looked back for verification. I don't know. But what she did was certainly no worse than what Sarah did with her laugh.
Okay, so yeah, so let me explain that a little bit more. I like it. She looked back, there, more than the physical looking back, it was the, I actually am more part of those people than these people. She was very wicked, Lot's wife. I mean, maybe-
What did she do? What do we
Oh,
know?
yeah, did you miss that story? So,
Oh,
yeah, so this, did you miss why she turned into a pillar of salt?
because she looked back?
No, oh wait, so she looked back, so she turned into a pillar of salt, but why salt? Why did she turn into a pillar of salt?
Oh,
Why
I
was
heard that. Yes, I heard that story because she was stingy with this, with her guests.
Right, so her guests wanted salt and she said, oh, I don't have any salt, so that she can go around to all her neighbors and say, oh, I need some salt. You know why I need salt? I need salt because I have guests. And that's what led a whole mob of people to come and try to kill these guests.
Oh,
Right, like in
Huh.
other words, she wanted to be part of, she didn't approve of Lot inviting guests into the home.
I
She was, I'm part of the Sodom and Gomorrah people, that we are against hospitality and we are horrible to people. And her looking back was also, again, not just the physical, oh, you look back, so you turn into a pillar of salt. It was, that's where she like, almost like had her allegiance, so to speak. Like that's
Okay.
where she identified with the most. And it was like,
Okay.
oh,
That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That makes sense. She's looking back at what she considered her home and her people, where she
Yeah,
thought she
yes.
belonged.
yes,
Okay, that's good.
yes,
Didn't God tell them, don't look back?
yes. Right, so they were told, don't look back. She looked back and she turned into a pillar of salt. So if you just look at it like that, you're like, seriously, you're gonna turn someone into a pillar of salt because and apparently you could go see the pillar of salt in Israel.
Oh,
Has
that's
anyone
not
done
true. Yeah,
that?
well, yes, but
It's not?
every
I
place you
didn't.
look, they go, that's the pillar of salt. Then you can go on another tour and they'll tell you.
Really?
"Oh, that's, yeah.
There's tons of pillars of salt in Israel?
Yes. Yes, there are.
It's like,
I'm gonna have to go verify this.
it's so reminiscent of the
Yeah, but that's a sea. I'm like, a pillar of salt? Like, what does that
You
look
can
like?
see it. Some
Yeah.
people take pictures of them all over the place.
Oh, that's funny.
it's reminiscent of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice.
Oh,
When
yeah.
Eurydice was being rescued by Orpheus when she was in the underworld,
Okay.
she was told, they were both told, don't look back, and she looked back, and she was killed, or she was sent back to the underworld for good.
Okay. All right. We'll stick with the the Torah version. Were you about to say something, Tessa? No?
You believe
Okay.
it or not, no.
So just to take it back a second, we were talking about, right, like how Mashiach, both ancestors of Mashiach are in this Torah portion, right? Because Mashiach comes from both Isaac and from Lot's daughters, right? Who Moab, right? So I think the fascinating part here is kind of like what Tessa said. She made a comment of that's so like Mashiach coming from such, say it again for me, like terrible beginnings.
It's a
like,
terrible beginning.
a
and
terrible
from that
beginning.
Comes, Mashiach of the Jewish people.
Right. And so these two paths correspond, right? So we have the path where terrible beginning, terrible, we're like, this is horrible, this is awful. And then Mashiach's going to come from that. So it's like, why would something so incredible and something so like the purpose of all of creation come from such a terrible beginning? Or Mashiach comes from Yitzchak as well. And Yitzchak, we said, was just amazing, it was a blessing and beautiful and happy and all the way till today. So these two paths correspond to the two paths we can take through history to reach the ultimate fulfillment of Mashiach. Mashiach will come regardless, but there is, and this is kind of a whole other topic, but the Rebbe has a lot of talks on this, about good specifically coming through like negative channels, right? And almost that like, here's a line that I really love. Often great blessings are smuggled to us through great difficulty.
Amen.
And I loved just thinking of it like that. I'm like, it's almost like I'm going to smuggle the blessing to you. I'm going to get it to you. And here's the way I'm going to get it to you is through this whole other scenario or story or thing that just seems like, how could anything good come from it? How could a blessing come from it? That's one way, right? This goes back to the different ways that God interacts with the world versus open and revealed like Isaac, right? And Mashiach incorporates both of those. Mashiach incorporates the struggle and the terrible and the hard and the complex and the lack of understanding and the right, like, which is also probably a lot more reminiscent. I feel like I'm totally like, I have a word, but it's like not the word I'm looking for, of our journey through exile, right? Is much more of, instead of Isaac down to Mashiach, like how great we have the ancestor who's born and we're so happy. And then we come along down history until Mashiach comes, versus this other one, right? Where it's great blessing smuggled through circumstance, other,
Reminds me
yeah,
of Baal Tshuva,
yes. Tell us more.
or Baalet Tshuva, the
yeah.
female.
Mhm.
Because I guess according to what I've heard in Judaism, the Baal Tshuva, or the person that returns after living a questionable, sinful life, is actually considered to be more of a tzaddik than the person that was just good all the way through.
Right. So the idea of like, right, like if you can imagine having like a rope between us and God or something, right? And a tzaddik has like a nice strong rope, and then someone, when you do something that's going to sever that rope, imagine a cut in the rope, and then you do teshuvah, you return to God, feel the regret and stop doing it and return to God, and then there's like a knot in the rope. The knotted rope is going to be much stronger, right, than the rest. So that's like that idea, right? A Baal teshuvah is like the knotted rope. You end up having a much deeper, stronger connection to God.
But a knot is actually a weak link, like in a thread, because there's tension there.
The
Wouldn't-
tension is good.
Yeah, it is good.
I like the tension because the tension keeps, it's like we've talked about this before, the tension keeps it straight. And that straightness helps you walk that path. Because if the path is weak, if there's no tension, it's easy to fall off. But if it's a tight path, it just keeps you going forward. And yes, the knot could be a little glitch that you have to step over, but you can still keep going. So I look at the knot as a strength and not a weakness.
Also depends on the strength of the knot, right? Like, could there be a rope that has a knot in it, and that rope is stronger than the rope without the knot?
You know, Fred went through that terrible back surgery and very difficult complications. If he hadn't have had that was 3 months ago, we would not have found out that he has another issue going on that is life-threatening. Not now, because we're taking care of it. But again, getting through that first, I see the hand of God. I know he's going to be okay because the hand of God has guided us and got him through the first part, so we could to see the that which was hidden became revealed.
Wow.
And now we're dealing with it. It is
Wow.
so clear to me.
So that is a
clear to
perfect
me.
example, right, of this, what God does to us seems sad when it happens, but we see the good in it, right? And then the idea of you having faith through that.
Yep.
That is incredible. Yeah, you should see open and revealed. You should get to this next one. What God does for us is revealed goodness and kindness. Just be like open and revealed miracles.
I had some a thought that just kind of came through. If I might speak,
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's hard to hear the people that are
Not on the microphone.
that are with you. But when there was that issue with the number 4 earlier on,
Yeah.
and as we were talking and as you were reading, I was thinking that the characters, the women, even the men that are in these stories, have various characteristics. And I likened it to the Passover story of the 4 sons. The 4 different characteristics, like they're all, each of us has a little bit of these characteristics in ourselves, and if we can see that, and we might, so the little wickedness, a little goodness, a little,
Yeah.
and that's, I was just feeling that throughout the whole thing.
Yeah. That's fascinating to make the 4 sons, and then also you can kind of see that with, right, with Lot, with Did my sound just go off now? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, with Lot, with Avimelech, with Abraham, right? With Isaac, we see like the different characters. Does anyone else have any other questions on this? Yeah.
I think that your story about Fred really touched me. I wish him the best.
Thank you, thank you.
But you know, sometimes tragedy strikes and we really don't understand it. We don't see God's finger in it. And I think it's like it's our attitude at every point in time that really is not so much what is actually happening, but our attitude towards it.
Well, I think sometimes that there may be good coming out of it, but the evil is, or the bad is far worse, at least for us.
You're saying even if it's where you see the good,
Yeah,
it's not like worth,
it wasn't worth
it wasn't
price.
worth it.
Yeah,
Because in our small minds, we don't understand what's going on, you know, in the big picture.
Yeah, I would say that I would say then that it's almost like there's still either more good to come, or it's not, or it's the part where we don't like it's not revealed, you know what I mean? But like,
that's where it falls into unrevealed.
right, the unrevealed. Yeah, when what God does for us seems sad, we may never understand the good in it. That is one of the ways.
And it's hard to be, for me anyway, I should just speak for myself, it's hard to really be that interested in what the good is.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of times.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's not there, even if we just don't see it and don't experience it. And we might not, right? We may not ever experience it. It's not like we are blessed to always see the good that comes from things. We're not. We daven for that, we ask for that, but we're not always granted that.
Because we can't see the whole story.
Right.
You know, we just, in our small minds, we just can't grasp it.
Or another way I would say that is maybe that the good is not for us, it's a more general kind of good.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a burden
Hmm.
of being
Yeah.
a child of a Holocaust survivor, and my husband is also a child of Holocaust survivors. How their attitude, like somebody said here, their attitude towards it has a happy ending. They had children and grandchildren,
Mm-hmm.
but they had to see the good after all that, even though they lost everybody. It's a burden. My dad always tells the students when he speaks, it has a happy ending that we would, you know, it's got the family.
For you,
Yeah.
or for them, yes. My cousin is also a Holocaust survivor, and he did not have such a happy ending. He refused to have children. He couldn't look at a movie like, say, West Side Story and say that's an inappropriate subject for a musical. It affected him all his life. Yeah.
Okay, so
Every parent had a happy ending.
yeah,
Yeah,
there's a whole range, right, of
right, that's
survivors and
right.
what they're, yeah. Okay, so either we can end here, or I can share with you another thing about the Parsha, or it's not so much focused on the Parsha, but another beautiful topic that I learned based on the Parsha that I learned this morning. What's everyone's vote? Okay, I'm going to share it. So this is from a talk of the Rebbe, a sikha that I learned this morning on a teleconference with one of my previous teachers and a mentor of mine. So in the Gemara, there is a phrase, a verse. I don't know. I have no words today. Do you hear this? I'm like, there's a piece. It says, okay. It says that the Jewish people are Rachmanim, Baishanim, and Gomle Chasadim. Okay, I don't know if you've ever heard this, which means Jewish people are Rachmanim is like merciful, Baishanim is modest, shy. Baishanim is like when you're shy, yeah, when you're like embarrassed, but what that means as like a character trait is like you're like refined, you're modest, and humble. It's like being humble. And then Gomle Chasadim, which is acts of kindness, right? We do lots of acts of kindness, okay? So let's say we're merciful and humble and perform acts of kindness, okay? So that's what it says in the Gemara. The Rambam, when he codifies and talks about I don't know, Rambam in the Mishnah Torah, he repeats this phrase from the Gemara. Oh, sorry, here's the connection to this week's Torah portion, because that's really what we're going to focus on. But the connection is that then there's how do we know this? Like, how do we know that this is what Jewish people are? So in this verse in Parashat Re'eh, there's a verse there that talks about Jewish people. That's where Rachmanim comes from. And in this verse in Parashat, I forgot what the Parsha is, it has this verse that talks about Baishanim. And in this week's Torah portion, in chapter 18, verse 19, I don't have one in front of me. I could find out what the verse is. It talks about, I think, Avram's acts of kindness, his gomle chasadim. He was do you want me to find the actual verse?
No.
No, no one cares.
Okay.
We're going to trust me that there's a verse there that talks about us performing acts of kindness. Okay, so that's based on these three verses. The Gemara says that here's how we know that this is a trait of Judaism, a trait of Jewish people. These three things. Now, the Rambam, when the Rambam like repeats this Gemara, but the Rambam specifically has it in a different order. The Rambam says we are Baishanim, which is the modest, humble. Then we're Rachmanim, we're merciful, and then we're Gomle Chasadim. Okay, so he switches up the order. And just to add to that, the Gemara says, when the Gemara says these three things, then it's saying that they're specifically all linked together. In other words, it's not like we're this, or we're this, or we're this. It's like in order, and like anyone can be kind, right? Kindness is not a Jewish trait, it's a trait in the world or whatever. Anyone can be kind, but our kindness is specifically linked, or meant to be, linked with mercy and modesty, mercy and humility. So it's like these three come together. Okay, so now the Rambam switches up the order. So the Rambam says, by shanim first, that in other words, the humility has to come first. A person has to first recognize that God is the one who runs the world, and I am standing before God, and God in his greatness, right? Like the humility of like who I am, right? So like I'm just, in God's world and all that. And then once you have that humility, then it'll lead that you're humble, you're refined, then it will lead to a feeling of rachamim, a feeling of mercy for another person. Then once you feel that humility, you'll see someone in need and you'll be like, oh, of course I'm gonna wanna help them, right? So then that leads to the gomle chasadim, the actual acts of kindness. In other words, what the Rambam is saying is that he switches the order because he says the baishanim, the qualities of humility, sets you up for rachmanim, right? Sets you up for feeling merciful, feeling sensitive to the needs of others, which then sets you up for gomle chasadim. You're going to then do acts of kindness. And doing it in this order, the Rambam says, that is the Jewish way. And only in this order is the Jewish way. Right? It has to be in this order because a person can do kindness as an expression of his own ego, right? A person can be like, we actually see this a lot of times. It could be like, they just want the media attention. It's for the sake of the media attention, or it's for the sake of, they don't even know who they're helping. They just need to do it. They need to give this amount of money or whatever, so that the world will because that's what their, agent, their press agent is telling them.
Mitzvahs too.
In what way?
Like this, what is it, the 10 stages of giving charity?
Oh, yeah. Right. Like there's different levels of giving charity. Yeah. So, right. So a person can do a kind thing as an expression of his own ego, right? You could donate millions to charity and it has nothing to do with the actual act of kindness, but it has more to do with their own agenda. That's like, then there even be doing it because it makes me feel good. It makes me feel good to give. Therefore, I'm going to give. That's still a level of something about that being part of me in there, part of my ego, part of my sense of self, right? It makes me feel good. Therefore, I'm going to do this. That's not as like blatant as like, it's purely egotistical. I really don't, it's not about the giving. It's for some other reason, right? So, okay. Like, why do I feel like I lost my thoughts? Hold on. Yeah. Okay. So an example of this, like a person that's like, I'm doing it because I feel good, is someone who's like, wow, like I'm such a good person. And right, like, and this poor person, like Nebuch. How do you translate Nebuch?
Not never.
Is there a translation?
Yeah, it's like a nevish.
Yeah, like it's so sad, like this, like I'm so a loser. There you go. It's like a loser, right? Like I'm so great, and and look at me because I'm gonna have mercy on this loser that I get to help them. Okay, so that's if there's rachamim, the rachamim first, and then the baishanim, right? If you have the mercy, like if the baishanim, you have to first have the humility to have good mercy, right? So first is the bittul. We spoke about that word bittul, right? First is the humility, then is the mercy, then is the acts of kindness. And that is why the Rambam puts it in this order. But
in essence, as long as someone's giving, we all have different stages of our development or evolution. As long as someone's giving, I think it's a good thing, even if it's for the wrong reason.
yes, 100%. So that you're 100% right. But this is like saying like the Jewish, right? Like the Jewish way, like what we strive for. And you're right. Even if someone gives for all the wrong reasons, they're giving tzedakah. It's still tzedakah.
Right.
It is. It's you can't take that away. Like, I'm like, I don't care if someone's giving 10 million because they want their name on the who knows what, like they gave the money, right? Like they cared. Okay. So, so here's the thing, right? So then the question is, if this is true, right? The way the Rambam like changes the order because it's so important to do it this way, right? Then what question are you left with? I'll let everyone think for a minute.
You do it the other way. If you change the order back.
Yeah, why did the Gemara put it this way, this other way then? Why did the Gemara have it this way? And then the Rambam switches it up and explains, and this is why, because it has to be this chain of progression to your acts of kindness.
Isn't it a quote from Micah? You walk humbly with your God. It's like three things. Is it those three things? It's part of our Torah. I couldn't find it.
Baishanim rachmanim gom lechasadim?
Yeah, it's.
Is it? I could tell you where it is in the Gemara.
No, I need to know where it is in the house.
I don't know that one. Okay. Right. So then right, we understand this idea of like you have to first be really humble, understand that there's a God and right, like take yourself out of the picture, and then that can lead to you're really being sensitive to another person's needs and then giving from that place, right? So then the question is, why did the Gemara put it Rachmanim? First is the mercy, then is the Baishanim, then is the humility, and then comes the Gomei Chasadim, right? So, okay. So if a person, so this is where the Rebbe actually like takes this idea and just gives it like this whole new, that kind of like turns the whole thing on its head a little bit, right? So if a person feels mercy, okay, they feel this Rachmanim, they feel this, and it was in the true Jewish way of like real compassion, real sensitivity to someone else, it would right away lead to humility. I'm going to tell you why. In other words, the Gemara, right, switches up the order is actually because our humility, our bittul, comes from our mercy. Comes from our mercy. I'm going to explain why. God set up the world in a way that there would be people who have and people who have not. There's the haves and the have-nots. Now, I don't want to say that it's set in, like, I don't mean that one person has and one person has not. I'm saying all of us are sometimes in the category of have, and all of us are sometimes in the category of have not. And this does not just mean physically, right? It does mean physically. You could talk about physical wealth and not wealth. It could also mean spiritually. It could also mean emotionally. It could also be with your time. We're talking about all the areas, right? So in other words, there's sometimes that we're at the receiving end, and there's sometimes that we're at the giving end, right? So we're sometimes in the position of have, and sometimes we're in the position of have not. Now, when God was giving out, tasks to all the souls, right? Like what's going to be for you and what's going to be for you, right? One soul, let's say, volunteered to be the have-nots, so that this other person who's going to be the have in this scenario gets to be the beneficiary. So gets to be the giver, and they're like volunteering in this scenario. I'll be the beneficiary, like I'll be the one who doesn't have, and this person has this mitzvah to give. Okay. In other words, when you have someone in front of you who is needing something from you, right? So they're in the category of have not, and you're in that category of have. And again, for all of us, it means that it can switch in life, right? So let's just go with, for example, let's just say, imagine that somebody is sick and they are sick at home and they need someone to get medicine from them from the store and they can't because they're sick and they're at home. And somebody who is in a position to offer to get them medicine from home, right? I'm sorry, to bring them medicine is in the position to do that, right? It's not like I'm so merciful, I'm so great, or no, I'm sorry, I get to do this favor for the other person. If anything, it's this person like took this on, is like almost like their soul chose to be sick in this moment so that I can be the one to give them medicine. Like, thank you for being the one who's took this on so that I don't have to, so that I can give. I'm going to try to explain this a little bit more clearer. Okay. In other words, like in other words, the rachamim, the mercy come first, because the mercy is, in a way, I'm so sorry that you have to go through this for my sake. Not that I did this to you. Again, I don't want to take this wrong. I'm going to keep explaining until it clicks. Okay. I'm so sorry that you have to go through this for my sake.
It's for my sake.
It's for my sake that
Because I
I
get to
have
do all
something to
this
do.
stuff.
My soul has something it needs to do here. And I'm so sorry that you have to go through this so that my soul can fulfill its mission here.
Somebody's sick and you're allowing me to do the mitzvah of getting you a medicine.
Yes. So in this talk that I learned inside this morning, the Rebbe says that when the Friedricher Rebbe, his father-in-law, he was on a boat in 1929 coming to visit America. And he got really, really sick on the boat. I just want to make sure I'm saying the story right. Sorry, he didn't get really, he got really sick on the boat, but I'm going to tell you why. This was in 1929. On the boat, he heard the news. I don't know how that could have happened. Okay. About the Hebron massacre. So in Hebron, there was a huge massacre that happened. And the Friedrich Rebbe heard about this news on the boat. And as a result, he got really sick from it. And there was a Jewish doctor on the boat who took the initiative to help him. So the doctor helped him out on the boat. And then the doctor apologized to him. And he said to him, there's no way that God would put such a righteous individual, right? This Rebbe on a boat, make him sick without having someone to help him. So I'm so sorry that if I wasn't on the boat, you would have never gotten sick. But because I'm on the boat, you got sick and I'm able to help you, right? So he's almost like, so I want to, again, we have to, this is like a whole Fabrengen topic, right? Could really talk this through. Like, what does this mean exactly?
Cause and effect together.
Yeah, and this idea, so why does the Gemara say Rachmanim first? Is because you're moved to help someone, right? You have compassion, you have sensitivity, leads to the Baishanim, the humility. The only reason that I'm in this scenario to help you is because you took this on for me. You see that? A whole switch on it. And then that can lead to the acts of kindness.
So we've been doing it more unconsciously. Now you're saying it out loud.
That is what tzedakah means. Tzedakah means justice. You know why we give tzedakah? Because it's the right thing to do. It doesn't mean charity. Charity is I have and you don't have and I'm going to give to you. Right? Tzedakah means I'm in this position where I see that you're in this position that you need something. I'm in this position that I can give it, so I can give it, right? It's like it's just the right thing to do. It's like I happen to have, let's just say with money, I happen to have this money. Not I'm better because I have it. Not I'm lucky. Like I happen to have it. It doesn't belong to me. It was given to me from God. I'm in this position where I give it to you. But like here's like the switch on it is the Rachmanim to the Baishanim is the only reason that I have it and you don't is because you took it on to be in the have not in this scenario. Your neshama took on so that I could be in the other scenario. So thank you.
That's really interesting.
Wow.
Remember the day I asked you for help?
Yeah.
And look at what that snowballed into.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a perfect example. And that is a perfect example of like the have and the have nots, how it's not. It doesn't mean you're like, which category am I in? Am I in the have or the I have the have not? It's like sometimes we're in the, can I share the story a little bit or do you want to share it?
I've been parentally broke for like 10 years. after I stopped working in a chef. I stopped working, everything fell apart economically. And I've been living on my social security check barely, with the help of my son. So I didn't have a single extra penny for 10 years. It's very exhausting. And one day after the Megillah had been read, I was upstairs in the old house and I heard them saying, this is a perfect time to hear people in need. This is a perfect time. And I never thought until that moment that I actually was in need. I was getting by, you know, it was hard, but I was getting by. And I went up to Adina and I said, I'm really in need. And she said, right there, I'll be right back. And I don't know what she did. She made magic and she came back and she handed me money, a wad of it, like a dope deal. Nobody saw it, you know, it was just like that. And it melted. Yeah. I had a meltdown internally. And since then, I have become their most devoted helper.
Yes.
You brought a yurtzeit candle to my house.
I did?
Yes,
Oh,
you
okay.
did. For Fred's sister.
That was
couple of-
so much fun.
couple
I
of
go to
weeks
everybody's
ago.
house because I'm now the emissary.
So-
And it all started with Sammy. The very first time I came to the
Yeah.
Chabad, Sammy, the Holocaust survivor, he was 2 during the Holocaust. And he witnessed the doctors doing experiments on children and horrific things, but he came out of that and he told his story to everyone. He's like a motivational speaker.
I heard him in
Yeah.
Puerto Vallarta.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
So it started that day.
So that's a perfect example of like the have and the haven't, right? Like, and now Yaya's like doing everything for us, right? So a lot of things, right? It's so helpful, right? And so now you're in this, right? So it's this exactly. So it's this just really fascinating like shift of looking at how, you know, how the ultimate of our Jewish traits of Baishanim and Rachmanim and Gomle Chasadim and this order and really like getting to the ultimate of how we can be and how we can be givers in the world and how we can treat other people. And it's a whole mind shift. It's a whole other thing.
Interesting. I'm glad you shared that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Just learned that this morning and I was like, wow, I love this. So just wanted to share that with you. Okay, that ends today's Torah and Tea. We'll be back again next week for more. I should stick with the Parsha at 1, not at 4. Stick with the 4. Okay. Okay. All right. Bye, everybody on Zoom.
No, bye, y'all. You should get it.